The chilling and tragic story of Sporus is not a mere figment of Greek myth, nor an allegory plucked from the depths of a dramatic play. It is a stark, unsettling, and undeniably real episode, meticulously documented with every harrowing detail within the extensive archives of the Roman Empire. Its authenticity is further bolstered by the unequivocal testimony of some of history's most venerable and weighty chroniclers. Figures such as the unflinching Suetonius, the meticulous Cassius Dio, and the incisive Tacitus. We are delving into the life of an adolescent, a young boy, who by the direct and absolute command of none other than Emperor Nero, yes, that Nero, was subjected to the brutal, irreversible act of castration. Following this mutilation, he was then paraded before the Roman populace, presented not as a companion, not as a concubine, but horrifyingly as Nero's wife. This was done without the slightest pretense of anesthesia, without any regard for his pain or his will, and he was adorned in the ceremonial toga of a bride. And no, let it be unequivocally stated, even by the notoriously extravagant and often shocking standards of Roman society, where banquets frequently devolved into spectacles involving lions, rivers of wine, and quite possibly a casual murder or two, this particular event did not go unnoticed. Senators and ordinary citizens alike were left with jaws agape, their minds struggling to reconcile the sheer audacity of Nero's decree with any semblance of sanity. Regarding the precise origin or social class of Sporus, historical sources regrettably remain silent. They offer no indication of whether he hailed from a noble lineage, born into privilege, or if he was simply plucked from the anonymity of the Roman streets. All we definitively know is that he began to appear in official records around the year 65 AD, a period precisely coinciding with Nero's most creative and unhinged phase. Contemporary accounts describe him as a boy possessing a porcelain-like complexion, a face so exquisitely delicate, so ethereal, that it bordered on the unreal. He was, by all descriptions, so strikingly androgynous in appearance that upon seeing him, Nero, consumed by his own peculiar madness, famously exclaimed, "This is Poppaea's clone." The exact age of Sporus at this time remains unclear, but there is a pervasive historical consensus that he was exceptionally young when he was brought into the imperial palace. Far too young by any modern standard for the horrific fate that awaited him. In parallel with Sporus's abrupt entry into his life, Nero was enduring a period of profound emotional instability. He had, not long before, suffered the tragic loss of his second wife, Poppaea Sabina, who, adding to the emperor's grief, had also been pregnant at the time of her death. How did she die? Suetonius, with his characteristic bluntness, recounts that the emperor, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, delivered a kick to her belly, for of course, anger management was hardly a cornerstone of Roman education. Following Poppaea's demise, Nero spiraled into a vortex of profound, almost delusional melancholy. He erected altars in her honor, engaged in hallucinatory conversations with her portrait, and with a childish petulance, assiduously avoided uttering aloud the true circumstances of her death, a truly mature response from the leader of the known world. It was precisely amidst this delirious grief, this profound emotional disarray, that Nero first encountered Sporus. Upon beholding the young boy, with his eerily uncanny resemblance to the deceased Poppaea, Nero made a decision so utterly bizarre, so fundamentally detached from reality, that it makes even the notoriously insane Caligula appear remarkably sane by comparison. His grotesque decree to transform this innocent young man into a living replica of his departed wife. How did he achieve this monstrous feat? He commanded Sporus's immediate, brutal castration. Without anesthesia, of course, for the intent behind this barbaric act was not medical in the slightest. It was purely aesthetic. The goal was to halt the boy's puberty, to permanently preserve his divinely feminine, pre-adolescent appearance, to freeze him in a state of perpetual youth and delicate beauty that mirrored Poppaea's. Once this grotesque procedure was completed, for to call it surgery would be far too elegant for the brutal reality of what truly transpired, Nero wasted no time. With a shocking lack of shame or filter, he began to publicly present Sporus as his glamorous new wife. He dressed Sporus in the sumptuous tunics befitting a high-born Roman lady, adorned him with glittering jewels, bestowed upon him imperial titles previously held by empresses, and as if that were not enough, he orchestrated a full-blown wedding ceremony. Cassius Dio, ever the diligent chronicler, even mentions a substantial dowry and a form of ceremonial blessing, because naturally, if one is going to descend into utter delusion, it should at least be accompanied by proper protocol. The message transmitted by this spectacle was unequivocally clear. Sporus was not merely a companion or a courtier, he was the official, living, breathing, and emotional replacement for Poppaea. And yes, in case you were wondering, even for the Romans, a civilization where excesses were practically a part of their daily breakfast ritual, this particular act generated a profound uproar, a palpable sense of unease. The Senate, in a display of calculated cowardice, opted to look the other way, much like someone observing a house on fire, yet deciding it was merely part of the decor. However, the historians of the era, unwilling to ignore such a blatant transgression, meticulously documented the event, and their tone, it must be noted, was anything but diplomatic. The Roman populace, for their part, attended the public events where this imperial couple appeared in complete, unnerving silence. No one dared to applaud, to ask a question, or even to cough too loudly, lest they draw the emperor's volatile attention. Sporus, now transformed into a public figure and the emperor's official consort, rarely spoke, and not because he had nothing to say, but because he was simply not permitted to say anything at all. His sole role, his tragic purpose, was to pose, to exist as a silent, beautiful tableau. This twisted relationship between Nero and Sporus stands as one of the most sinister and chilling portraits of how absolute power, in its unbridled form, does not merely control individuals, it quite literally sculpts them, molds them, and reshapes them according to its own capricious whims and desires. This was not love in any discernible sense. It was not a consensual agreement. It was a poisonous concoction of profound grief, aberrant desire, and unmitigated imperial domination. From that grotesque ceremony onward, Sporus was inextricably sealed with the chilling title of Caesar's wife, forever trapped within a court where the only true constant was an elaborate, terrifying facade. And predictably, once the emperor's latest caprice had been publicly crowned, Sporus began to appear at all official events, at every public ceremony, and at every theatrical spectacle where Nero felt compelled to exhibit his masterpiece, an empress forged through brutal force. This was no discreet affair hidden away in the hushed corridors of the palace. Nothing of the sort. Nero flaunted Sporus as one would a coveted trophy. Sporus was his official wife in every literal sense, and anyone in the court who dared to treat him as anything less than an imperial figure likely found themselves quickly deprived of their head, or at the very least, their favored status. In fact, Sporus was forcibly integrated into the rigid palace protocol as a literal woman, a situation utterly without precedent, without reference, without any existing manual of etiquette that could possibly cover such a bizarre and horrifying scenario. And if you believe that this situation could not possibly escalate further, brace yourself. Suetonius recounts that Nero even took Sporus with him on his infamous artistic tour of Greece. Yes, because in addition to being a tyrant of unparalleled cruelty, Nero genuinely believed himself to be a Greek pop star, a virtuoso of the arts. During those theatrical, musical, and monumentally ego-driven performances, Sporus would accompany him, meticulously dressed as a Roman matron, complete with a flowing veil, of course, and flanked by a retinue of female attendants. It was an elaborate, meticulously choreographed performance. Nero acted as if he were genuinely married to a woman, but behind the carefully applied makeup and the concealing veil, there stood a young boy, an adolescent who had been forcibly transformed into a character, a decorative puppet, a living human costume meticulously tailored to appease the escalating delusions of an emperor in the throes of a complete emotional collapse. The majority of contemporary chroniclers, unburdened by modern sensibilities, mince no words when describing the origin of this grotesque transformation. They assert that it stemmed from a deeply troubled emotional root within Nero himself. For Nero, Sporus was not merely a fleeting pastime, nor a purely ornamental figure to adorn his court. He was, chillingly, Nero's desperate, twisted attempt to bring back Poppaea, the very woman he himself had violently sent to the other world with a brutal kick. Cassius Dio, who never shied away from blunt honesty, made it unequivocally clear. Nero transformed a boy into a woman, and his own profound grief into a macabre public spectacle. There was no love in this equation, no reciprocity, no genuine affection. There was only a man, utterly disintegrated by his own madness, attempting to mold reality itself, to reshape human bodies, and even to forcibly alter memories, all in a desperate, futile attempt to avoid confronting his own terrifying ghosts. The case of Sporus, in its sheer audacity and its profound disregard for human dignity, left the Roman elite deeply uncomfortable, and in a society where public executions and even casual assassinations at dinner parties rarely caused a ripple of scandal, this speaks volumes about the extremity of Nero's actions. On one hand, Nero wielded such absolute and terrifying power that questioning him was tantamount to engaging in an extreme, potentially fatal sport. Few dared to openly defy him, and the vast majority preferred to applaud with trembling fear rather than risk ending up in a decorative ditch. Yet even within that pervasive culture of "do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't splash onto me," what Nero did with Sporus was widely perceived as an absolute, unprecedented outrage, and it was not merely because it involved a relationship between men. Such relationships were, by Roman standards, a commonplace occurrence. Rather, it was because of what it profoundly symbolized: a blatant, undisguised imperial abuse of power, a tyrannical act to mold a human being into a living statue of a personal obsession. This was not a consensual partnership. It was a state performance, a coerced role with profound public, political, and even ritualistic implications, all enacted under the flimsy, transparent mask of imperial love. The most chilling aspect of Sporus's story is his utter silence in all historical texts. Nothing, not a single quote, not a recorded reaction, not even a simple sigh. We know him only through the words written by others, by chroniclers and historians who, it must be noted, were often far more interested in condemning Nero's depravity than in humanizing his decorative victim. And then, the uncomfortable questions inevitably arise. Who was Sporus truly, behind the concealing veil and the meticulously applied makeup? What thoughts raced through his mind? How did he feel about being brutally transformed into a mere symbol, into a living, breathing, tragic memory of another? We are left with no answers, only the echoes of his forced silence. And it is precisely because of this profound absence of his own voice that his story resonates so powerfully, so disturbingly. It represents all those countless individuals throughout history whose voices were brutally ripped away by the relentless, grinding machinery of power. Some modern scholars, attempting to find some semblance of silver lining in his tragic fate, suggest that perhaps Sporus received certain benefits, luxuries, unparalleled access to the imperial court, and a degree of security under Nero's protection, the entire imperial package. But let us be brutally honest. Such supposed benefits do not and cannot erase the undeniable facts. A forced castration, a life put on public display like a museum exhibit, are not privileges. They are, in their purest forms, acts of profound violence and dehumanization, and they were so even in the 1st century AD. Rather than being favored by the system, Sporus was, without a doubt, its most raw and agonizing victim. During his harrowing time by Nero's side, Sporus lived under a relentless regime of constant surveillance, existing as if he were a breathing museum statue, perpetually on exhibition, perpetually adapting himself to the predetermined script imposed by the imperial court. His very identity was not his own. It had been assigned to him, brutally and irrevocably. He had no voice, no genuine choice, and certainly no means of escape. The colossal imperial apparatus had transformed him into something more than human, into a symbolic figure, a political object, a tool for Nero's psychological needs. And like any object in the hands of an authoritarian regime, his existence only held meaning and purpose for as long as the reigning dictator deemed it necessary. But even as Sporus played his silent, tragic role, the vast Roman Empire itself was beginning to fracture, to crumble from within. Nero, the artist emperor, the increasingly paranoid tyrant, watched as his meticulously constructed world of extravagant luxuries and terrifying delusions began to spectacularly collapse around him. Senators who had long hated him in silent fury now openly plotted. Armies across the provinces began to refuse his commands, their loyalty shifting, and enemies who had once cowered in the shadows now emerged, bold and defiant. And there, amidst this slow-motion imperial collapse, stood Sporus, silent, trapped, held aloft by the very threads of power that were simultaneously suffocating him. What would come after Nero's inevitable death would not only put a final gruesome end to one of the most grotesque chapters in Roman imperial history, but would also irrevocably seal the fate of Sporus. He was a character who never chose to be a protagonist, a figure tragically caught in a role, written for him by others, one of the most brutally manipulated victims of Rome's imperial madness. In the year 68 AD, Rome itself became a pressure cooker, its internal tensions boiling over, and the empire began to hiss and crack along its ancient fissures. Provinces erupted in open rebellion. Powerful generals brazenly proclaimed themselves saviors of the fatherland, and the Senate, that ancient club of well-dressed old men, finally decided that the time had come to release their grip on the tragic artist perched on the throne. Nero, witnessing his vast empire unraveling more quickly than a summer cake in the heat, desperately escaped with the meager remnants of his court, a few loyalists and, astonishingly, Sporus. Yes, even in this moment of utter, total debacle, Sporus remained by his side, still playing the role he had never chosen, that of the consort, right up to the emperor's very last act. It is widely recounted that Sporus was present during Nero's final agonizing days, when the emperor, utterly defeated and cornered by his enemies, made the ultimate, desperate choice. He would take his own life rather than endure the profound public humiliation that awaited him. The scene of Nero's death is one of those morbidly fascinating moments that historians endlessly recount, embellishing it with gruesome details. Some accounts claim that Sporus wept inconsolably, his grief a stark contrast to the emperor's grim determination. Others suggest that Sporus actually held Nero's head as the emperor, with the hesitant aid of a loyal slave, plunged a dagger into his own neck. The precise details may vary between chroniclers, but all accounts fundamentally agree on the essential truth. Sporus was there, a silent, unwilling witness, watching firsthand as the life drained from the man who had ripped him from himself, forcibly transforming him into the shadow of another. And with the emperor's final breath, the terrifying spell was irrevocably broken. The imposed role, the imperial title, the fragile protection that had shielded him, everything vanished in a single, devastating sigh. Without the backing of the absolute power that had so grotesquely molded him, Sporus transitioned from being the wife of Caesar to becoming, quite simply, nobody. Sporus's very presence, which in Nero's time had been tolerated out of a mixture of forced respect, abject fear, or sheer political convenience, suddenly became profoundly inconvenient, a glaring, uncomfortable anomaly. He was a programming error, a living glitch in the new imperial regime. Rome now had a new emperor, Galba, a stern general whose face exuded an aura of rigid discipline. He arrived with fervent promises of order and a clear, singular mission: to systematically erase everything that even vaguely smelled of Nero, even if that meant disposing of human beings. Galba's strategy was precise, almost surgical. He swiftly dissolved the disgraced imperial guard, swept clean the administration of all those tainted by Nero's patronage, and summarily removed figures like Sporus from the palace as if they were contaminated furniture, discarding them without a second thought. Suetonius, ever direct, spares no words. For Galba, Sporus was a living embodiment of shame, a public stain that had to be obliterated without leaving a trace. And so they did. There are no detailed chronicles of Sporus's final days, no poignant speeches, no grand funerals, no official laments to mark his passing. Only a brief, dark note in Cassius Dio's work, chilling in its brevity, states simply that Sporus was forced to take his own life. The official charge, a flimsy pretext, was participating in the decadent spectacles of the previous regime, essentially for merely existing under Nero. But the true motive was far more sinister. The new empire could not afford the dangerous luxury of having a living, breathing human reminder of the terrifying extent of its predecessor's madness. Thus ended the life of Sporus, without glory, without justice, and with no witnesses save the uneasy silence of a Roman society that preferred, above all else, to forget. Just as he had lived with a name, a role, and a body he did not choose, Sporus died without having any say over his own bitter end. This episode, though not entirely unique in the vast and often brutal history of Rome, stands out for its sheer rawness, its profound cruelty, and, crucially, for the unprecedented level of public exposure to which Sporus was subjected. We are not simply discussing a private relationship between an emperor and a vulnerable young man. We are delving into the horrifying mechanics of how a singular personal fantasy, born from madness and grief, was, by imperial decree, transmuted into official, undeniable reality. We are examining how the capricious whim of one man became absolute law for all, how the monstrous desires of a tyrant were brutally imposed upon an innocent. The story of Sporus compels us to confront head-on the stark and terrifying truth of what absolute power truly meant in antiquity. The terrifying capacity to fundamentally transform bodies, to rewrite entire biographies, and to irrevocably alter human destinies, simply because the ruler willed it so. As the centuries have passed, many have sought to impose meaning upon Sporus's enigmatic figure. Some view him as an undeniable victim, a poignant testament to the abuses of unchecked power. Others interpret him as a disturbing historical anticipation of modern debates surrounding identity and gender, a figure whose unique circumstances resonate with contemporary discussions. But attempting to neatly fit his complex, tragic history into rigid modern categories is, in a profound sense, a disservice, a fundamental misunderstanding. What occurred to Sporus was a tragedy born directly of his era, a direct and horrifying consequence of living within a system where human bodies could be treated as mere property, and individuals as pliable projects to be molded and manipulated by the emperor of the moment. His was a life brutally sculpted into a symbol, a decorative facade, and his end left behind only unanswered questions, haunting whispers of a silenced existence. Today, the name of Sporus endures, clinging precariously to the very fringes of history's vast tapestry. He survives not because he left behind any personal letters, any eloquent speeches, or any intimate memoirs, for he was permitted none of these. He survives because his silence was so deafening, so profoundly unsettling, that not even the most detached and objective historians could bring themselves to ignore it. Sporus did not leave behind his own words. He literally could not. Everything we know of him reaches us exclusively through the eyes and the pens of distant, often biased witnesses, chroniclers who were, in many instances, far more interested in condemning the depravity of Nero than in truly comprehending the young boy trapped, like a fly in amber, amidst his profound tragedy. And it is precisely in that agonizing absence of his own voice, in that profound historical void, where his story resonates most powerfully, striking at the very core of our understanding of human agency and historical injustice. There are no statues erected in his honor, no grand inscriptions carved in stone to commemorate him. Only a few scattered paragraphs dispersed within ancient chronicles and an uncomfortable, chilling reminder of the unimaginable depths to which unchecked power can truly descend. If you have journeyed with us this far, we want to hear from you. Do you believe Sporus was simply a victim of absolute power, a pawn in a mad emperor's game? Or is there something more profound, something deeper, embedded in his haunting story that speaks to the shattered soul of imperial Rome itself? Leave us your opinion in the comments below. And if you are drawn to this type of historical content, meticulously researched, narrated with seriousness and humanity, and presented without unnecessary embellishments, then make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications, because this is just the beginning. We have many more stories that you absolutely need to know.